My name is Aaron Petrov, and in the spring of 2017, I was scouting a new trail through Redfern Forest for a hiking blog I ran on the side. I'd done this dozens of times. Walk a new route alone, take notes, come back later with a group. That trip was the last time I ever scouted a trail by myself. About 2 hours in, I started hearing a call that sounded almost like a bird. 3 short notes repeated at regular intervals. I'm not a bird watcher, but I know enough to say that no bird repeats a call with that kind of mechanical precision, exactly every 11 seconds, like something was counting. I finally spotted it in a tree about 60 feet up, long, thin, wrapped almost snake-like around the trunk, but with too many joints in its limbs to be anything I recognized. Its head was disproportionately small, tilted at an angle that made the 3-note call again directly at me as though it had been waiting for me to look up. I kept walking, telling myself it was some kind of large bird or a trick of the light. The call followed me, though, always from somewhere above, always exactly 11 seconds apart, moving through the canopy at a pace that matched my own walking speed almost perfectly. About a mile later, the call changed. Lower, closer, and no longer coming from the canopy at all. It was coming from ground level now, somewhere in the brush just off the trail, moving parallel to me with a rustling sound that was far too deliberate for wind or a small animal. At a narrow bend in the trail, it stepped fully into view for the first time, maybe 20 feet away. Easily 7 feet if it had stood fully upright, though it moved in a low crouch, limbs bending at angles that made my stomach turn just watching it navigate the uneven ground. It made the 3-note call one final time directly at me and went completely silent. I ran without looking back, cutting off the trail entirely and pushing straight through brush until I hit the access road. I never went back to finish scouting that trail, and the blog post I'd planned never got written. To this day, whenever I hear 3 short notes repeated in any forest, I turn around and walk the other way without a second thought. My name is Priya Nair, and this happened in the autumn of 2020, hiking a section of Thornwood Forest that I'd underestimated badly, a day trip that turned into an unplanned overnight when I lost the trail completely just before sunset. As it got dark, I spotted a small cabin through the trees, smoke rising faintly from its chimney and a single window lit with warm, flickering light. I was cold, lost, and relieved, beyond words. I walked straight toward it without hesitating, already rehearsing how I'd explain myself to whoever lived there. About 10 feet from the door, I stopped without fully understanding why. The light in the window flickered in a rhythm too steady to be a real fire, on, off, at almost exactly the same interval every time. And despite the smoke rising from the chimney, I couldn't smell any wood smoke at all, even standing that close. I circled the cabin carefully instead of knocking, and what I found made my chest tighten immediately. The structure had no door on any other side, no visible foundation meeting the ground properly, and windows that showed the same flickering light from every angle, including one that should have faced directly into solid rock. As I backed away, the front door began opening slowly on its own, the warm light behind it shifting suddenly to something colder, almost blue. I heard my own name called from inside, a voice that sounded distantly like my mother's, though my mother had never once been anywhere near that forest in her life. I ran without a destination, just away, pushing through brush in complete darkness until my flashlight caught a real trail marker nearly 20 minutes later. When I finally found the actual access road and got cell signal, I looked back toward where I'd come from. There was no glow, no smoke, nothing indicating a cabin had ever existed in that direction at all. I went back 2 days later with a park ranger to show him exactly where I'd seen it. There was no cabin, no clearing large enough to hold one, and no foundation of any kind in the area I described. The ranger told me carefully that I wasn't the first person to report something similar in that section of the forest, and that no one who described it in detail had ever gone looking for it a second time before me. I still don't know what that cabin was or why it called out in a voice it had no way of knowing. I know only that I never once considered going inside, and that decision is the only reason I believe I'm here to tell this story at all. My name is David Okafor, and what happened to me took place in early 2022 during a solo hike through Graymore Forest on an overcast afternoon, a trail known locally for being remote enough that I saw no other hikers the entire day. About 3 hours in, I heard a voice counting, low, steady, methodical, counting upward in a tone that sounded neither excited nor distressed, simply mechanical. I assumed at first it was another hiker with a strange habit, maybe counting steps or trees for exercise. I called out a greeting. The counting paused for exactly 3 seconds, then continued from a slightly closer position. I finally saw him, or it, standing motionless beside a large pine roughly 80 yards off the trail. From a distance, he looked almost ordinary, dressed plainly, one hand resting flat against the tree's bark. But his proportions were subtly wrong, his neck slightly too long, his stillness too complete for a living person standing outdoors in the cold. As I backed away slowly, it moved to the next tree in an unnervingly straight line, pressed its palm flat against the bark exactly as before, and continued counting from precisely where it had left off. It wasn't looking at me. It seemed entirely focused on the trees themselves, as though counting them was the only task that had ever mattered to it. I stepped backward onto a dry branch, and the counting stopped instantly, mid-number, for the first time since I'd started listening. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd experienced outdoors before. When I looked again, it was no longer beside the tree. It was standing in the middle of the trail, 40 yards ahead of me, directly between me and the way I'd come. I cut off the trail entirely, pushing through dense brush in a direction I hoped led back toward the trailhead. Behind me, the counting resumed. Faster now, almost frantic. No longer matching the calm, methodical pace from before, as though something about my sudden movement had disrupted whatever process it had been performing. I reached my car nearly 40 minutes later, scratched and out of breath, having run almost the entire way without a clear sense of direction beyond simply moving away from that sound. I sat in the parking lot for nearly half an hour before I trusted myself to drive, checking my mirrors constantly, though nothing ever emerged from the tree line behind me. I've never gone back to Graymore Forest, and I still don't know what number it might have reached, or what was supposed to happen once it finished counting every tree along that trail. I only know that whatever it was, my presence interrupted something it had clearly been doing for a very long time before I ever arrived. These are stories inspired by real hiker folklore and wilderness legends. If these stories affected you, subscribe for more. And if you have a story of your own, send it to me. It might be the next one I share.